What happens when America's sweetheart meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when a simple promotional appearance turns into the most explosive confrontation in talk show history. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live delivered a shocking moment that has the entire internet buzzing, as Jennifer Aniston found herself trapped in an increasingly hostile environment that would ultimately push her to her breaking point. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood politeness collides with Kimmel's relentless pursuit of controversy. The stage was set for what should have been a light-hearted promotional visit. Jennifer Aniston, radiant in a sleek black blazer, settled into the guest chair with her trademark warm smile, ready to discuss her latest project. The studio audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, completely unaware they were about to witness television history in the making. Kimmel, sporting his signature smirk, launched into his opening remarks with what seemed like harmless celebrity banter. "Jennifer, it's always great to have you here," Kimmel began, his tone deceptively casual. "You know, I was reading some interesting articles about you this week." The way he emphasized interesting should have been the first red flag, but Aniston maintained her professional composure, nodding politely as she adjusted in her seat. "Oh, really? I hope they were at least entertaining," she replied with a laugh, her media-trained instincts kicking in automatically. The audience chuckled along, still blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath Kimmel's seemingly innocent setup. But Kimmel wasn't done. His eyes gleamed with the kind of predatory anticipation that every seasoned celebrity learns to recognize and fear. "Well, there's been a lot of talk about your personal life lately. Some people are saying you've been, shall we say, difficult to work with on recent projects. Care to comment on that?" The question hit the air like a lead balloon. Aniston's smile faltered for just a moment, a micro-expression that anyone watching closely would have caught. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what had shifted. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Jimmy," Aniston responded carefully, her voice maintaining its pleasant tone, but with a subtle edge that suggested she was already calculating her next move. "I've always tried to be professional and collaborative with everyone I work with." Kimmel leaned forward in his chair, clearly sensing he had struck a nerve and deciding to press his advantage. "Come on, Jennifer. There are rumors from multiple sources about on-set tensions, creative differences, that sort of thing. Are you telling me there's absolutely no truth to any of that?" The camera caught Aniston's jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. She had navigated countless interviews over her decades-long career, but there was something particularly aggressive about Kimmel's approach tonight that was setting off alarm bells. The way he was leaning into unsubstantiated gossip, the leading questions, the obvious attempt to create a moment at her expense, it all reeked of manufactured controversy. "Jimmy, I think you know better than to give credence to unnamed sources and industry gossip," she replied, her voice now carrying a warning that most hosts would have recognized and backed away from. "I'm here to talk about my work, not to defend myself against rumors." But Kimmel was either oblivious to the warning signs or simply didn't care. In fact, he seemed energized by her pushback, as if her discomfort was exactly what he had been hoping for. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter, the audience quieter, as the tension between host and guest became impossible to ignore. "Well, speaking of your work," Kimmel continued, his tone now openly challenging, "let's talk about some of your recent project choices. Some critics have said you've been playing it safe, sticking to roles that don't really challenge you as an actress. Is it possible that these on-set issues stem from you being, I don't know, out of your depth when you try to stretch beyond your comfort zone?" The question was a masterclass in passive-aggressive hostility, wrapped in the veneer of legitimate interview discourse but loaded with enough venom to poison the entire conversation. Aniston's media training was being put to the ultimate test as she tried to navigate this increasingly treacherous terrain while maintaining her public image. "I choose projects that excite me and that I believe will resonate with audiences," she replied, her voice steady but with steel underneath. "I'm not sure why you're so interested in creating conflict where none exists, Jimmy." The direct call-out hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Kimmel's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, the mask of jovial host slipped entirely. revealing something much less pleasant underneath. The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented but not quite sure how to react. Creating conflict? Kimmel repeated, his voice taking on a mocking tone. I'm just asking the questions that people are already talking about. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to be about? The audacity of comparing his gossip-mongering to journalism seemed to be the final straw for Aniston. Her composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally began to crack as she realized that Kimmel had no intention of conducting anything resembling a respectful interview. This was an ambush, plain and simple, and she was the prey. But what happened next would transform this already uncomfortable situation into something far more explosive, setting the stage for a confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. The breaking point arrived when Kimmel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out what appeared to be a printed tabloid article. The gesture was so theatrical, so obviously planned, that even the most casual observer could see this had been orchestrated from the beginning. He held the paper up with a flourish, his smile now completely devoid of warmth and replaced with something that could only be described as predatory satisfaction. Actually, Jennifer, since you mentioned unnamed sources, I have something here that might interest you, Kimmel announced, waving the paper like a weapon. This is from a very reputable entertainment publication, and it quotes several crew members from your recent film saying you were, quote, impossible to work with and threw tantrums when things didn't go your way. The color drained from Aniston's face, but it wasn't embarrassment or shame that replaced it. It was pure, undiluted anger. The mask of Hollywood pleasantries finally slipped completely as she realized the full extent of Kimmel's ambush. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a calculated assassination attempt on her character, broadcast to millions of viewers. Jimmy, I can't believe you would stoop to this level, she said, her voice now trembling with barely contained fury. You invited me here under false pretenses to humiliate me with tabloid garbage. This is beneath even you. The audience was now completely silent, the uncomfortable energy in the room palpable. Several people could be seen shifting in their seats, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but witnessing this character assassination in real time. But Kimmel was far from finished. If anything, her obvious distress seemed to energize him further. Look, I'm just reading what's already been published, he said with mock innocence, his tone now openly condescending. But since you're here, why don't you tell us your version? What really happened on that set? Because according to this article, you made several people's lives miserable for months. Aniston stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet studio. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that the camera operators scrambled to adjust their shots. She stood there for a moment, towering over Kimmel's desk, her entire body radiating the kind of controlled rage that comes from years of dealing with industry bullies. You know what, Jimmy? I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I've worked with hundreds of people. I've never, not once, had someone describe me the way you just did because it's simply not true. But what I find most disgusting is that you're willing to destroy someone's reputation for a few cheap laughs and some viral moments. Her voice was steady now, but there was an edge to it that cut through the studio like a blade. This wasn't the Jennifer Aniston the public was used to seeing. This was someone who had been pushed beyond her breaking point and was finally ready to fight back. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on his attack. Come on, Jennifer, don't be so dramatic. If the stories aren't true, then there's nothing to be upset about, right? Unless, he paused for effect, clearly savoring the moment, unless there's some truth to them after all. The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Aniston's hands were visibly shaking now, not with fear or nerves, but with the kind of rage that comes from being cornered by someone who clearly has no respect for boundaries or basic human decency. The audience was now dead silent, many covering their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing. You want to know what's dramatic, Jimmy? Aniston's voice rose, finally losing the careful modulation she had maintained throughout her career. Dramatic is inviting someone on your show to promote their work, and then ambushing them with lies and fabricated stories. Dramatic is destroying someone's reputation because you think it makes good television. She leaned forward, placing both hands on his desk, bringing herself closer to his eye level. The camera caught every detail of her expression. The fury, the disappointment, the complete betrayal she felt at being treated this way by someone she had considered, if not a friend, then at least a professional colleague. I have never, in my entire career, treated anyone with the kind of cruelty and disrespect you're showing me right now. And you know what the saddest part is? You're doing this to someone who has supported you, who has been on your show multiple times, who considered you a friend. Kimmel's expression flickered for just a moment, perhaps a flash of recognition of how far he had crossed the line. But it was quickly replaced by defensive aggression. Hey, I'm just doing my job here. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing press tours. The dismissive tone, the complete lack of accountability, the suggestion that this ambush constituted legitimate journalism, it was all too much. Aniston straightened up, her decision clearly made. She was done playing his game, done being his victim, done pretending that any of this was acceptable. Your job? She repeated, her voice now carrying a dangerous quiet that somehow seemed more threatening than her earlier outburst. Your job is supposed to be entertainment, Jimmy, not character assassination. Your job is supposed to bring joy to people's lives, not destroy careers for ratings. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Audience members were looking around nervously, clearly unsure if they should applaud, boo, or simply leave. The production crew could be seen in the background, frantically trying to figure out how to handle what had become a complete disaster. But Kimmel, either too proud or too foolish to recognize the gravity of the situation he had created, made one final, fatal mistake that would push this confrontation from uncomfortable television into viral infamy. With a smirk that could only be described as pure arrogance, Kimmel leaned back in his chair and delivered the blow that would seal his fate. You know what, Jennifer? Maybe the problem isn't the stories about you being difficult. Maybe the problem is that you just can't handle the truth about yourself anymore. Maybe you've been surrounded by yes men for so long that you've forgotten what real feedback sounds like. The studio fell into a silence so complete it was almost suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to pause, as if the operators themselves couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Kimmel had crossed every line, violated every unspoken rule of host-guest etiquette, and delivered what could only be interpreted as a personal attack designed to humiliate one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. Aniston's reaction was immediate and devastating. Her face transformed from anger to something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated fury, mixed with complete disappointment in humanity itself. She slowly removed her microphone, the small action somehow carrying more weight than any dramatic gesture could have managed. Jimmy, she said, her voice now eerily calm. In 30 years in this industry, I have never, ever, encountered someone as unprofessional, as cruel, and as pathetic as you're being right now. The fact that you think ambushing your guests with lies and personal attacks constitutes entertainment says everything anyone needs to know about your character. She placed the microphone carefully on his desk. The small click it made somehow thunderous in the absolute silence. You want to know what's really sad? I came here tonight genuinely excited to see you, to catch up, to share some laughs with someone I thought was a friend. Instead, I find out that you've planned this entire attack, that you've spent time preparing ways to hurt and embarrass me for your own twisted entertainment. The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people actually getting up and leaving. Those who remained seemed torn between wanting to applaud Aniston and simply wanting the whole ordeal to end. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a late-night talk show had devolved into something that felt more like a public execution. Kimmel, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of his miscalculation, attempted damage control. Jennifer, come on, sit down. Let's just... No. The single word cut through his attempt at reconciliation like a sword. I'm done. I'm done with your questions. I'm done with your ambush. And I'm done pretending that any of this is acceptable behavior from someone who claims to be a professional. She straightened her blazer with deliberate precision, every movement calculated and controlled. You know what the really tragic part is, Jimmy? You had the opportunity to have a genuine conversation with someone who has been part of this industry through its biggest changes. Someone who could have shared real insights and stories that your audience would have loved. Instead, you chose to be a bully. The word bully seemed to hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His expression changed, perhaps finally grasping that he had irrevocably damaged not just this interview, but potentially his relationship with countless other celebrities who would undoubtedly hear about this disaster. Aniston wasn't finished. And for the record, since you seem so interested in my professional relationships, every single person I've worked with, from directors to craft services, could tell you that I treat everyone on set with respect and kindness, because that's who I am. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Jimmy? Because this entire performance tonight shows exactly who you are. The devastating assessment hung in the air like a final judgment. Several audience members could be heard murmuring their agreement, and one person actually started clapping, though they stopped quickly when they realized they were alone. I hope this was worth it, Aniston continued, her voice now carrying a sadness that was somehow more damaging than anger. I hope whatever ratings bump you get from this pathetic display is worth destroying the trust that guests have placed in you, worth showing the world that you're willing to hurt people for entertainment, worth revealing that underneath all the jokes and the charm, you're just another person who gets off on making others feel small. She began to walk away from the desk, her movements graceful and dignified despite the chaos surrounding her, but she wasn't quite done delivering her final verdict on the man who had tried so hard to tear her down. Turning back one last time, she looked directly into the camera, addressing not just Kimmel but the millions of viewers who would inevitably see this moment. To everyone watching at home, this is not entertainment. This is not journalism. This is just a sad man trying to make himself feel important by tearing down someone else. Don't let anyone treat you the way I've been treated here tonight, and don't support people who think this kind of cruelty is acceptable. The message was clear, powerful, and absolutely devastating in its quiet dignity. She had turned Kimmel's ambush into her own moment of triumph, using his platform to deliver a masterclass in how to handle a bully, not with matching cruelty, but with truth and unwavering principles. Kimmel sat frozen at his desk, clearly realizing that he had not just lost this battle, but had potentially damaged his career in the process. The audience was now openly uncomfortable, many people shaking their heads or looking anywhere but at their host. Jennifer, please? He tried one last time, but his voice carried none of its earlier confidence. He sounded desperate, deflated, like a man who had finally understood the consequences of his actions. Without acknowledging his plea, Aniston walked steadily toward the exit, her head held high, her dignity intact despite everything Kimmel had thrown at her. As she reached the edge of the stage, she paused for just a moment and delivered her final words without even looking back. I feel sorry for you, Jimmy. I really do. And with that, Jennifer Aniston walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and what would become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history. The show's remaining segments were awkward and lifeless, as Kimmel struggled to regain his composure while dealing with an audience that had clearly turned against him. The incident had lasted less than 15 minutes, but in that short time, viewers had witnessed something unprecedented. A beloved celebrity refusing to be victimized, standing up to a bully with grace and strength, and walking away with her integrity completely intact, while her attacker was left looking like exactly what he was: a small, petty man who had mistaken cruelty for entertainment and paid the ultimate price for that miscalculation.